All right, we are back here on the podcast talking some New York Giant football here as a very disappointing 100th season came to an end. Joining me today covers the Giants for the Star Ledger. Darryl Slater is here. Darryl, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on here once again here. And obviously the Giants made a huge deal out of their 100th season. They did the offseason Hard Knocks. They had the whole new alternate uniforms. Made a big deal out of this year, the documentary for Wellington Mara. And this year goes completely off the rails. They finished 3-14, the third pick of the draft. Are you surprised how badly things just sort of went out of control with the Giants this year?
Yeah, I was. I mean, I think the baseline level of confidence that Daniel Jones showed when he was healthy, especially in 2022, you would have thought they would have gotten off to a better start than they did by the time they waved the white flag on him at 2-8 after that loss to the Panthers in Munich. But it was just an all-around disaster from Daniel Jones' performance to the offensive line's play to the secondary's issues. So this roster is like very clearly lacking beyond just quarterback. I think that was evident this year. And they have a lot to fix this offseason, again, beyond just saying they want to snap their fingers and get a franchise quarterback, which is not going to be easy this offseason. They've got a lot to fix, and they're going to do it by bringing back this head coach, Brian Daboll, and GM and Joe Schoen, when really there were plenty of reasons to move on from this duo. But John Mara decided to run it back, and we'll see whether that results in a coaching and GM search happening at this point next year. I think that's certainly possible.
Yeah, that's true, because, I mean, there was a point this year the Giants beat Seattle at week 5. They're 2-3. Okay, it's not too bad. I know the documentary comes out at the end of October, and John Mara's asked then about, like, bringing them back. He said, I want to. I don't want to be too rash. We have this thing in the past where you've been too impatient. It's listening to him after the season, like, he brought them back. It wasn't the strongest endorsement to do so. So are you surprised at all he didn't change his mind after how the year unfolded?
Yeah, I was. I mean, and you listen to some of the things he said about why he retained them. In the course of trying to explain why he retained Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, he was giving all these reasons for why he should have just fired them. He was asked if he thinks the roster is better off than it was in 2022, and he said, basically, I can't say that it is. It was a baffling media session that he had, but he did give some reasons why he thinks that this duo has what it takes. But look, I mean, it's the toughest schedule in the league next year based on the winning percentage of their opponents, what their opponents' winning percentage was this year. They could very easily go winless at home after going 1-8 at home this year. So I just don't see a way in which it's going to get better. And then if you're going to draft a quarterback, which they may not be able to at this point, given the circumstances of where they fell, you would think that it would make a lot of sense to get the quarterback, the coach, and the GM all in the same timeline. They did not opt to do that. So they could be in the same situation they were after 2019 when they moved on from Pat Shurmur after Daniel Jones' rookie year. And remember, John Mara had said that he regretted putting Jones through all that early career change. They could very well be in the same situation next year, having done that to their rookie quarterback in 2025.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you mentioned here, like, the difficult schedule the Giants have next season. You look at it. I mean, they play, obviously, the division's tough. They play the NFC North. They play the AFC West, which those divisions had 6 teams the playoffs in here. They got the 49ers probably coming off a down year. You said the home schedule is brutal, but the way John Mara was talking made it sound like he wants, like, at least proximity to the playoffs, if not the playoffs next year. Do you think there is an actual mandate for them to get to the playoffs, for these guys to have another year after this?
I mean, if there is, it would be insanity. Like, you can't, look at the product that was on the field, look at the roster. And you can't absolve the GM and certainly not the coach, but most especially not the GM of the blame, right? So you could say, well, what did you expect? Our roster's not very good. The GM is the guy who picked the roster, so, okay. If he's a playoff mandate, it's completely unreasonable. It's just not reasonable considering where they are in their rebuild, especially because you're going to be rolling out potentially a rookie quarterback. They're not the odds of making the playoffs. I know Bo Nix did it in Jaden Daniels, of course, this year, right? So it's possible. It is possible, but the rookie quarterback typically goes through growing pains, and everyone knows this is not a great quarterback draft class, right? So if they do get Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward, those guys are not, plug and play stars. They're not sure thing guys that they're ever going to be great players ultimately at all. So I think if this team wins, 7 games, that's probably what it's going to take at minimum. I think that's what it's going to take at minimum. You're not getting the playoffs at 7-10, probably, not 8-9 either. And so, I think there's that margin of 7 wins, 8 wins, maybe 9 wins where they could achieve that and keep their jobs without making the playoffs. You saw Seattle miss it with 10 wins this year, but most times 10 wins gets you in. The Giants are not winning 10 games this year, right? So they're probably not winning 9 games either. I think their absolute ceiling would be 7 wins, and I think that keeps them around. But I would, at this point, be more likely to say that they're going to have definitely less than 7, which would be, probably, I can't imagine that at 6-11 he would tolerate keeping them around, right? Just because they won 6-11, then 3-14, and 6-11. Like, no, that's not going to be enough. It'll have to be, I think, 7-10 or better.
Yeah, and the scary thing too, as you mentioned, I think honestly, if they get to 7 with who they have, I know obviously things change with rosters and quarterback decisions and the coaching decisions, but on paper here, if they get to 7 wins, with that schedule next year, this guy's done a very good job.
Yeah, I mean, well, right. So, what does that tell you about how poor of a job that Joe Schoen has done building this roster? Yeah. I mean, it's been horrendous. I mean, the best players in the team were Dave Gettleman picks. I guess if you set aside the neighbors, who's obviously, looks like he's going to be a star, but you think about the veteran guys like Dexter Lawrence and Andrew Thomas, and that's really where it ends, right? And they did trade for Brian Burns, who had a very good first year with it. So, but in terms of drafting guys, Joe Schoen has really done a poor job with his premium picks from 2022 to 2023, and that should be the foundation of this roster right now. It's really not. A lot of those guys are liabilities, from Evan Neal to Deonte Banks to Josh Azudu and John Michael Schmitz. I mean, these guys have not performed up to the level. And like you said, 7 wins would be a huge accomplishment given the schedule and the state of the roster. But the flip side of that is, what does that tell you about the job the GM has done? When you could basically say, "Oh, we're going to hang a banner for winning 7 games in the 4th year of a rebuild." Now, granted, they have not had an opportunity to draft and develop their own quarterback. But I mean, look, no one said they had to give Daniel Jones a 2-year, $82 million commitment. They could have franchise tagged and been done with and paid him $50 million less than they paid him. And it would have been a 1-year commitment, and they could have moved on from him. But they didn't. They decided not to do that. So you could make a case that he was their quarterback, that they did commit to him. And now they're in a situation where it's a bad year to be desperate for a quarterback in this draft, and they beat the Colts, and they really hurt themselves in terms of controlling their destiny to get a quarterback, which is the same situation they were in last year because of all the Tommy DeVito stuff down the stretch. And they missed out on Jake Daniels, missed out on Drake May, and now they could be in a situation where they miss out on really the only 2 good quarterbacks in this class in Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward. And the draft analysts think that those guys would probably be behind even the J.J. McCarthy tier from last year. It would be like the 5th or 6th best guys in last year's draft class, if that.
Yeah, it's true. And the quarterback situation is definitely a mess because obviously they moved on from Daniel Jones. They are now sitting 3rd in a 2-quarterback class by all accounts, assuming that the Browns and Titans do take quarterbacks. Giants probably shut out there. Where are they looking for quarterback next year? Because I don't know if Drew Lock would love coming back, considering they tried to bypass him for Tommy DeVito a couple of times. Obviously, Sam Darnold situation, saw that kind of devolve from Minnesota down the stretch here. Justin Fields, there's not a ton out there.
No easy answers, that's for sure. And Drew Lock is not the answer. Yeah. Justin Fields is not the answer. Is Sam Darnold? I mean, he certainly gave you plenty of reasons to doubt him based on how he performed down the stretch. Had a very good regular season with much better talent around him. And, you could say Kevin O'Connell was his coach. Okay. Well, you know what? Brian Daboll the Giants hired him because they thought he was that type of guy, given what he did with Josh Allen, right? So, you can't say what do you expect? You couldn't do that with the Giants because he had O'Connell. Well, Daboll was supposed to be like O'Connell. He's supposed to be that type of guy. So, look, right. So Sam Darnold, Justin Fields, no. Drew Lock, no. Russell Wilson, geez, another guy who really sputtered down the stretch, just like Darnold, right? Darnold's got age on his side more so than Russell Wilson in terms of being younger. Would they trade for Kirk Cousins? It's a big contract, and it's, I don't know. The contract would certainly mitigate what you'd have to send off for him, but another guy who's not going to be a long-term solution in terms of his age. So there's not easy answers out there. Would the Saints cut Derek Carr? He said he doesn't want to take a pay cut, and his cap number is huge next year. I think that's certainly something to look at. He had a pretty good year. Derek Carr's, he was 10th in quarterback rating each of the past 2 years. So even though the Saints have not been good, and obviously he didn't play a full year this past year, but he would be one where I think the Giants ought to take a look at that. Now the Saints may keep him. There's that. So there's just so much that's outside of the Giants' control, and it all goes back to the fact that they beat the Colts. Week 17. All they had to do was lose out, and they did lose to the Eagles backups, and they really didn't try to beat them. And so, it's really tough. There's no easy answers, that's for sure.
Yeah, another thing that tells you the state of the roster is look at the list of potential free agents the Giants have here. Aside from maybe Azeez Ojulari or Darius Slayton, there's not a lot of guys that are leaving and you say that you have to bring back. It just shows you how devoid the roster has become at this point.
You're talking about, Darius Slayton overachieved as a fifth-round pick, certainly has. He'll be on his third contract now because he only got a 2-year deal when he was up last time. And I would not think he would. And again, a Dave Gettleman pick who overachieved. I doubt he sticks around. They had drafted Malik Neighbors. I think he pretty clear that Darius Slayton is no fan of Joe Schoen. And again, look, if he gets the best offer from the Giants, could he possibly stay? I guess. I don't see it happening. I think he's gone. But again, he's a fine player. He's serviceable enough. Jason Pinnock, their strong safety, is a free agent. He's not anything special. In terms of Azeez Ojulari, why would he want to stick around? He's performed pretty well when he's been healthy, but he's not going to start with the Giants. Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns are their starters, and Thibodeau is a guy who has underwhelmed given the fact that he was the 5th overall pick. So I would think it's possible the Giants will let Pinnock walk. As far as the other guys, I'm sure the Giants would like them back at the right price because they're productive guys, and Slayton and Ojulari. But why would they want to come back given the potential for better opportunities elsewhere?
Yeah, it's crazy too. You look at the situation. Entering the offseason, there's things they can do to change numbers and whatnot, but they only have $43 million in cap room entering the offseason, according to Over the Cap, which is not a lot for how many needs they have. So it's crazy that a lot of this group is pretty locked in. I know there's things they can do to shift some money around. They took the Jones dead hit, but I don't know how much room they're actually able to do to go crazy in free agency and fill in a bunch of needs if the regime feels they're on borrowed time.
Yeah, they're about middle of the pack in cap space. They can create probably $6 million or so more cutting Rakeem Nunez-Roches and Graham Gano. I would think that they would do that. They'd obviously need to no matter what, get a new interior D lineman to play next to Dexter Lawrence because Nunez-Roches hasn't been very good, and they would need to get a new kicker. But it wouldn't have to cost them, what they've paid for Graham Gano on a bad contract extension. So I think that they could certainly free up cap space that way. Again, you'd have to replace those positions. But you look at all the other issues they have, even on the offensive line alone. Andrew Thomas, if he's healthy, could be very good, but they have an issue at center. John Michael Schmitz, the 2nd-round pick, has not developed enough through 2 years. And at right tackle, you bring back Jermaine Illuminor, who had a solid first year with the Giants, but then what about the guard spots where you had Greg Van Roden and pending free agent who's 34 years old. He's not a long-term solution at one spot. And then John Runyon, who didn't really play that well, but they're locked in with him for next year, based on they gave him a 2-year commitment essentially in his contract from free agency last year. So they need the guys who they paid and drafted highly. Now, yeah, Burns had a good year. He did, and Dexter Lawrence, when he was healthy, had a good year. That's obviously not enough. You can't blame the fact that you can't say 3-14 happened just because they lost their left tackle, right? And just because they didn't get good enough quarterback play. No, it happened partly because there are things like their center weren't good enough. And oh, by the way, you draft Deonte Banks to be number one corner, and he's been a disaster through 2 years. It's hard to overcome that. It really is. So as much as Joe Schoen's going to get flack for letting Xavier McKinney walk, letting Saquon Barkley walk, those sort of things are forgivable if you backfill the roster. If you fill in the roster, maybe that may not be the right term, with your affordable contract draft picks, right? If you hit on your second round picks, your third round picks, if you hit on the 24th overall pick, and you don't whiff on Evan Neal, like those guys are cost effective replacement players, right? So it's less glaring. So Tyrone Tracy that's what you want out of a running back, right? That's a perfect example. You don't have to pay big money for a running back, but it's impossible to focus on the success of a Tyrone Tracy when you have guys like Schmitz and Josh Azudu and Deonte Banks, who at times just look like they don't even belong on the field. And to have your GM whiff in the draft, you got to rebuild through the draft ultimately, mostly, right? And so Joe Schoen has just, through his first 2 drafts, with a better draft in 2024, did such a terrible job of that. That's why they're so far behind.
Yeah, for sure. And the last thing on the Giants front here is in terms of like the draft, they're sitting there at the number 3 pick. Obviously, we've gone over. They could have had the number 1 pick if they just lost the Colts, but they didn't. That didn't happen. So, the interesting thing is here. Do you think this is a scenario where like this regime feels the pressure to try and trade up and get one of the top 2 guys at quarterback? They say 3, hope one of them falls or fills another need. Like, what do you think they do with the draft for the first round?
Well, I think the Titans at 1 are probably going to take a quarterback. Yeah. I don't see them trading out of that pick. The one where I thought, okay, the Browns are at 2, and before all this stuff came out about Deshaun Watson's re-tearing his Achilles, you could have said, okay, well, they're stuck with him for the next 2 years, and then, of course they may not be because his social media action showed he potentially was not adhering to his rehab, whatever. They could maybe get out of the contract. But you think at $71 million the next 2 years, maybe they just stick with him. Again, this was the thought before the re-tearing of the Achilles. And maybe they're willing to move back 1 spot. The Giants would move up to 2. The Giants could get the second quarterback. The Browns could still get Travis Hunter. And that would, let the Browns get a little bit of draft capital. And it would box out the Giants from a team like the Raiders or the Jets jumping to 2, right? Theoretically. But now it looks like, given the fact that Deshaun Watson did, re-tear his Achilles, maybe they just draft a quarterback, right? So Drew Aller is coming back to Penn State. Not that, again, as we saw in his final game there, not great, right? So he's got some work to do. Do they take Jalen Milroe at 3? Do they trade back and a few spots and get a quarterback there while getting some more draft assets? Do they just pick another position, a player at another position in the draft? Well, free agency is going to dictate some of that, right? So if they go out and trade for Kirk Cousins or they sign Derek Carr, then in all likelihood that's their guy for this year. Then they're not going to draft a quarterback high. Maybe they would draft somebody in the second round, like if Jalen Milroe's there, and okay, a second round player's still a premium pick. Like Jalen Hurts is a second round pick, so there's no rule that says you can't make a franchise quarterback out of a guy in the second round. So maybe they try to split the difference that way. I think no matter what, Tommy DeVito's not the answer. Drew Lock's probably gone, right? So let's just look at it like that. They need 2 quarterbacks, so they've got to address it in free agency and the draft. So the question just becomes, which way is the more high profile way that they address it? And given the fact that free agency and the trade period, I guess, comes first, I would not be surprised if they make a pretty substantial move in that because they just don't and can't control what the two teams ahead of them in the draft are going to do. And they saw that last year. I mean, if the Patriots had stayed at 1, then that would have been a fascinating thing because they don't need a quarterback, and that maybe the Giants could have finally pulled off that trade that they tried to last year, right? They tried to move up to 3 for Drake May, but the Patriots took them. Well, say the Giants had wound up at 3 and the Pats had wound up at 1, right? There's absolutely a world in which the Giants could have traded to 1. But unfortunately for the Giants, the Patriots won. They dropped out. The Titans move up. Oh, and the Titans need a quarterback. So it could not have possibly gone any worse for the Giants in the final 2 weeks of the season in terms of how that draft order played out.
Yeah, I think if it was me, and I know the quarterbacks are just coming out here, it's like, I think the Giants are an attractive opportunity just because, like, if you're a quarterback, they have a clear path to playing time, and there's no clear path to drafting ones. I think they could get potentially a veteran like a Kirk Cousins or maybe a Russell Wilson if Pittsburgh moves on.
Sure.
Like, I think if I'm the Giants, I'm sitting at 3, like, you need, like, big-time players on this roster. I think, like, just, taking Travis Hunter at 3, I think would be an appealing option to me because, like, he fills your big cornerback hole you whiffed on with Deonte Banks. You can use him at receiver a little bit to moonlight and get some skill value out of him that way. And, like, as a guy that brings attention to the organization in a positive way, it gives you potentially 2 dynamic young players built around him and Neighbors.
Yeah, I could see them doing that. And you remember Russell Wilson, they were in the mix for him last offseason, and I'm sure, again, if you're Russell Wilson, you come visit the Giants, you're like, okay, why would I sign here when this team could go? And remember, obviously, last year there were a lot more quarterbacks, right? So even at 6, everyone was saying, oh, well, even the Giants could stay. They could have drafted McCarthy, Penix, or Nix, right? And they did. We'll see if they wind up regretting it. But if you're Russell Wilson in the middle of March coming to visit the Giants, knowing what the quarterback landscape looks like in the draft, why would he have signed here? He could have gotten the rug pulled out completely from underneath him. He made the right decision signing in Pittsburgh, right? A team that was you're going to have him and Justin Fields, and very clearly was not going to bring in a high draft pick quarterback, right? So this time around, if Russell Wilson comes back, coming off a very surprising year overall in Pittsburgh, successfully, all things considered, maybe he's more amenable to signing with the Giants as a bridge option, if only, like you said, because he knows that it's less likely that they're able to get their guy at 3. So maybe that's possible. I think that, and then with Travis Hunter, I think Travis Hunter would be a fantastic option for the Giants. It wouldn't solve their quarterback situation, but this regime needs to produce results this year. I think it would be different if, say, they had the number 1 pick and John Mara kept this group, and it was very clear they're going to be drafting a quarterback who would need some patience, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if he would have come out and said something like, I'm running out of patience, right? Because that would have been ridiculous, because everyone would have known they're drafting a quarterback at 1 who's going to require patience. Now, it's more gray. The possibilities are living more in this gray area where you could bring in Russell Wilson and say, all right, well, we expect a certain level of play at quarterback immediately. And then, like you said, bring in draft Travis Hunter and say, all right, well, now go win in 7 games with this group. So, that's certainly a possibility.
Yeah, sure. And last thing here, just general NFL sense. Obviously, we're in the playoffs right now. The wild card round, for the most part, was a bust. You got 1 great game, 1 decent game, and a bunch of blowouts here. Divisional weekend looks much better here. What are you looking forward to checking out here this weekend with the 4 games we have on tap?
Oh, I mean, obviously the big one in Baltimore and Buffalo. That's the huge one. So yeah, I think that'll be a fantastic game. Just looking at the schedule as we're talking here, I hadn't gotten a chance to I know the matchups, but I think Texans Chiefs will be, the Chiefs will handle them. Commanders Lions, look, I mean, if you're a Lions fan, all of these games have got to make you nervous, right? Given your team's history is waiting for the other shoe to drop. They're so injured defensively that, Jaden Daniels has to scare you a little bit, or a lot bit, right? I would have thought the Packers would have given the Eagles a better game there. But I don't underestimate Sean. Why would you underestimate Sean McVay? He's a great coach. It's a crazy thing to say at this point. But he's him versus Vic Fangio, the Eagles DC, is such a good matchup. I think that's a really fun matchup to watch. I see the Eagles are favored by like 6.5 in that game. I don't know. I mean, I think the Rams could keep it a little closer than that. You look at the lines. I'm just looking at ESPN's lines, right? So KC -8, Detroit -10, Eagles -6.5. Could be looking at like 3 more blowouts there, unfortunately, in terms of the quality of the game if you're just an objective observer, right? But yeah, Ravens Bills is the one that just looms so large, and it looks like it'll be 20 degrees. Man, wouldn't it be great if it snows? 6:30 on a Sunday night in Buffalo. That's going to be such a great game. I mean, you're talking about the two teams left, right? If you could pick right now, like obviously Ravens and Bills wouldn't play in the Super Bowl, but that would be an awesome Super Bowl matchup, let alone in the divisional route. Just the quality of those two quarterbacks and those two teams. So, yeah, I think that one for sure. It was kind of a bust of a wild card weekend, and unfortunately, you just look at how top heavy the NFL was this year. And I know that the Vikings did lose to the Rams, right? And they won 14 games, but the way that the Lions mowed through people, and then again, but the fact that they had those injuries down the stretch, their defensive issues makes that game a little bit more interesting, I think. Detroit -10. Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough place to play. It's a tough place to play, especially for a rookie quarterback, but there's a reason why the Giants, you saw in Hard Knocks, they asked Brian Daboll, will you trade up for Daniels? And he didn't, the sentence wasn't even complete. But I would. It's like asking someone with you want $1 million? Yeah, I'll give them it's like a total no-brainer.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a surprise in one of those early games. I think if there's one upset there, I think it could be Rams over Eagles. Again, Nick Sirianni, I don't know. I mean, to me, it's like he doesn't strike me as a particularly like a Sean McVay type, right? Like as Wiz. Maybe it's just his demeanor. I don't know, but it's worth remembering that McVay really is matching up with Vic Fangio, who has seen it all and has done a really nice job with the Eagle defense. So, I think it'll hopefully be a little more entertaining. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think the game has sneaky potential to me is that watching the Detroit game on Saturday night, because as Detroit obviously sat around last week, didn't play. They got the bye. They had the defensive issues here, and Commanders are definitely playing with house money in this game. Detroit's under a lot of pressure to get to the Super Bowl, so I think there's a good chance that game's closer than people think it's going to be.
Yeah, that could be possible. Be a fun weekend. Hopefully, like I said, a little more entertaining than last weekend, though.
Yeah, I think we'll get more entertaining football, Darryl. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. People want to follow you on social media and keep up with your NFL coverage, your Giants coverage. How can I do that?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Darryl Slater, DarrylSlater, and then we're at NJ.com/Giants. And appreciate you having me on as always.
Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the games this weekend.
Thanks, man.